just goes unheralded. And I just, from my heart to yours, I just want to say thank you for the role that you play in our future leaders, and I so greatly appreciate it. In honor of Mother's Day, I found some quotes that I'd like to read to you. A Jewish proverb says this: God could not be everywhere, and therefore he made mothers. Another one says this: when you're a mother, you're never really alone in your thoughts. A mother has to think twice, once for herself and once for her child. As I began to think about that, depending on the husband, maybe once for him as well. Another one I found: it would seem that something which means poverty, disorder, and violence every single day should be avoided entirely, but the desire to beget children is a natural urge. This one I relate to on a very high level because of working with teenagers. Mothers of teenagers know why animals eat their young. And then a Chinese proverb said this: there is only one pretty child in the world, and every mother has it. Is that not true? I'm in my 11th year of being a youth pastor. I know I look way too young to be 11 years in this thing, but this January I celebrated my 10th year of being a youth pastor. Around year 3, I began to get the question with often regularity: when are you going to become a real pastor? When are you going to become a real pastor? I never knew how to respond to that. I always thought I was a real pastor. And I work with an organization called Lift Student Ministries. They're an international camping organization, and I volunteer a week of the summer to be a director of a camp in the Midwest. And the executive director is a friend of mine named Dan Brown. And he's 50-plus years old, and he's still going strong. He just went full-time into this camping organization and is giving his life over to teenagers. And he was asked, why do you work with teens? And can't somebody younger do that? And his response became my response. This is why I'm a youth pastor. He simply pulled out a picture of his kid and said, there are many reasons why God has called me to work with teens, but this is my primary reason. And I wanted to introduce you real quick to my kids. This is Madeline. She's age 6, and she just started kindergarten. You see the intensity in her eyes? That's the way she functions 24/7. She is our leader, very much so. And then this is Brennan. Brennan is my softie. He's my cuddle bug. He's my lover. He's my buddy. He's what I call my buckaroo. And he's 3 years old, and he'll start next year in the fall. He'll start preschool. And then finally, this is Autumn. That's a little bit of an older picture, but that's our surprise baby, Autumn. She's 2. And she's got some of the most gorgeous eyes I've ever seen. So I'm a father. And when I look at the fact, and I look at my children, and I look at the generation that's going to lead them, and I look at the teenagers that are right now across the street in youth group, they're going to be my children's doctors, my children's leaders, my children's pastors and teachers. They're going to be the ones that mentor my children and guide my children when I'm no longer able to do so. And as a father, I want to do everything in my power to not just give them an inheritance of financial wealth, but of spiritual wealth. Another quote that I came across this week was one that actually is quite scary. And as you read this and look at this, it says, parents often talk about the younger generation as if they didn't have anything to do with it. Have you ever seen an older person, a parent, sit back and say, I don't know what went wrong with this generation. What happened to these kids? They're weird. Well, that quote was meant to be humorous. I found it to be extremely accurate and truthful. In a book, last week in the USA Today, there was an article about young adults and their faith. Thomas Rayner is the president of Lifeway Ministries, and he conducted a survey that USA Today was reporting on. The opening line says, most young adults today don't pray, don't worship, and don't read the Bible. Some of the key findings were 65% rarely or never pray with other people, 38% almost never pray by themselves, 65% rarely or never attend worship services, 67% don't read the Bible or other sacred texts, and many are unsure that Jesus is the only path to heaven. If you look at the state of families in America, it isn't much better. In a book called Parenting is Your Highest Calling and 8 Other Myths That Trap Us in Worry and Guilt, Leslie Fields says, all of us know how the traditional family is under serious attack. Family units now include same-sex couples and 3-parent families in which children's needs are sometimes seen as less important than the rights and whims of adults. Child abuse is rising so fast that it is described as an epidemic by the Child Welfare League of America. As families fracture and states begin to scramble to fill the gap, more and more children are entering foster care. In talking to parents today, the 2 questions that I hear fielded the most are, how do we as parents counter culture and its powerful influence? How do we pass on our faith, guiding our students to become true disciples? Where is that point where they leave our faith and actually solidify it as their own? And how do we help them achieve that? Well, I was going through Proverbs this week, knowing that the topic that I was supposed to speak on was raising children. I went through and kind of did a read-through, just thinking and looking at those things. That idea of parenting and what Proverbs has to say. I came up with 5 main things that Proverbs and the wisdom of Solomon and the other people that contributed put down of what parents should do. Number 1, wise parents fear the Lord. Wise parents fear the Lord. Proverbs 14:26 says, he who fears the Lord has a secure fortress, and for his children it will be a refuge. My mind works weird. And the first time I saw Andrea, I remember if this was the church that we were in, she was sitting, walking across the front. I remember the exact dress that she was wearing. I remember the day that Madeline was born and all the goop all over her face and her actually opening up and looking at me and holding her and knowing my world had just radically changed. I remember seeing Brennan and holding him for the very first time and also Autumn here in Boise. And they're just like these videos that I turn on and play every now and again in my head. And they're things that never leave. There's a lot I forget. I don't remember a lot of memories about a lot of things, but those are things that are stuck with me. And I never realized holding Madeline that first day how difficult, how overwhelming, how exciting, how thrilling, how frustrating that being a parent could be. I sat there thinking, I know this is going to be harder than I think, but I'll have control. It'll be good. I'll have control. About year 2, I realized control was an absolute lie and illusion. There's nothing you can control about another individual, no matter how young they are. Oftentimes I heard that our highest calling is to be a parent. You guys ever heard that? Heard it preached. That's my highest calling. That's my greatest ministry. And I began to think about that this week. And I began to think of how much bondage and guilt that places upon you. Knowing and realizing that you don't have control of your children, and if they choose to go a way that is opposite from what you led them up to, obviously I screwed up. Obviously I'm a worthless parent. Then I began to think that God, being the first and the greatest parent, his kids screwed up too. And so I began to wonder and ask myself, is that really my highest calling? And if you look in Luke 10:27, it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. Exodus 20 puts it this way, you shall have no other gods before me. Our highest calling has always been and will always be, no matter the phase of life that we find ourselves in, to love God supreme. To love Him supreme. We are to fear God. What does that mean? I remember as a little kid being taught on fearing God and actually having to be afraid of Him, thinking that you had to cower in a corner and you had to tremble in fear and wonder, you think about the songs we sing. Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do. For your Father up above is looking down on you. Oh, great. Where is He at now? Oh, I just screwed up again. We fear God, but that's not what it's talking about. This idea of fearing God, this idea, it means to honor and respect God, to live in awe of His power and to obey His word.